The book of John, chapter 7, verse 16, Jesus says, "My doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me." I make sure I remind myself of that scripture each and every time I stand before a group of people to speak. If Jesus did not have the right to preach his own doctrine, neither do I. The doctrine I preach is the doctrine of God's, that he has given us through his word. That's a charge to the preacher. But the very next verse, John chapter 7 and verse 17, "If anyone wills to do his will, you will know concerning the things of which I teach, whether I teach on my own accord or whether I preach for God." That's a charge to the listener, to make sure what the speaker says is true. I am a human being, and I can make mistakes. I strive to teach God's word the way that he wants me to. I heard several years ago in Jackson, Tennessee, a preacher stand up and said, "A preacher is somebody who gives the Bible a voice." And I try to take that to heart. I try to give the Bible a voice when I preach from God's word. What a wonderful God we serve. And I'm thankful for all that he has given and all that he has done for us. And you know, throughout life, I stand in awe of many things. I am not a usual person. I wake up around 4:15, 4:30 every morning, except for Saturday. And Saturdays, I try to sleep in till 5:30 or 6. But I'm at my office every morning by 6:30. And I love to sit and I love to look out the window. And I love to see the sunrise. And it was not any more beautiful than the day after Harvey left. I enjoyed looking out that window and seeing the sunrise that morning. But I stand in awe as the sun comes over the horizon. Sheila and I were standing on the beach in Pensacola, Florida, looking out at the ocean and watching the sun as it set. As we stood there holding hands, we watched in awe as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. And what a beautiful sight that was. I stand in awe when I looked into the faces of both of my boys upon their birth. I stood in awe of the beauty of those two children. And of course, I'm like all the parents. I don't think there's any babies that were any more beautiful than mine. Or in my case, handsome. To see those perfect faces, those hands and those feet. Oh, I stood in awe. I stood in awe the first time I held each of my 4 grandchildren, 2 boys and 2 girls. And to this day, I stand in awe when I have the opportunity to be with them. When I hold them in my lap and I look in those sweet faces, a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. I stand in awe when I see them. I stood in awe as I went camping in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York. I stood in awe as I went into a cave and shined my flashlight around. And within the boundaries of that cave, I found what we call an ice cave. I shined my flashlight upon that ice, and to see the beautiful colors that reflected off of it. All I could do was stand in awe. I've walked along the trails of the Appalachian Trail about this time of year, and I watched the leaves as they change colors. And oh, what a beautiful sight it was. And I stood in awe. Standing in awe is being speechless. And looking at a certain wonder. But today I stand in awe of God. I stand in awe of the creation that He created. As I look around this beautiful world in which we live in, and I stand in awe of God, and I stand in awe of His power. I stand in awe of His love. I stand in awe of His giving. I stand in awe of God. The reading that we had from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, starting in verse 1. I believe that those scriptures teach us how to stand in awe of God. First of all, if you would go back with me to the second verse, do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. We stand in awe of God when we watch our tongue. James tells us in James chapter 3 and verse 12 about the importance of the tongue. You know, the tongue is just a small little part of your body, isn't it? If you would, grab a hold of your tongue and try to talk. But when you don't have control of your tongue, it can say anything, can it? We stand in awe of God when we control our tongue. When we hold our tongue and hold back the things that many times we shouldn't say. How many of y'all are like me and on a number of occasions have tasted the sole of your shoe in your mouth? I put my foot in my mouth a few times too many, I'm afraid. But do we control our tongue? The tongue is such a small part of the body, but just as a bed is a very small part, a small thing that fits into the horse's mouth, it also controls how the horse goes. I remember riding Toppy. Toppy was my grandfather's horse. I was born over in Cisco, Texas. If you don't know where Cisco is, you don't know anything about Texas. Cisco's over near Abilene, real close to Eastland, a rising star. My mother's in an assisted living in Eastland now. I take that trip about once a month to go up and be with her. We put her on hospice back in February. But her father, Papa, had an old horse named Toppy. Never did have a saddle on Toppy. I always rode him bareback, and we left Cisco when I was 8 years old and moved to New York. What a cultural change. I got to New York, they asked me, they said, do y'all really ride horses and wear six-shooters? Well, I didn't lie all the way, but I said yes. We rode horses. We didn't all wear six-shooters at that time. But Papa would put that bit in Toppy's mouth. And I would get on him and I could control him to go where I wanted to go. The rudder of a ship is a very small part of that ship. but yet the captain can take control of the wheel and turn that wheel, and that rudder moves just a very small distance. And that big ship makes that turn. We stand in awe of God when we're careful for the things that we say. Titus chapter 2, verses 6 through 8 talks about sound speech. Their speech needs to be sound. Sound doctrine, we need sound doctrine preachers today. Amen. Sound doctrine in the Greek means healthy teaching. We need preachers today that will healthy teach our congregations, that will teach and speak where the Bible speaks, and is not afraid to preach the whole counsel of God, as Paul did to the elders at the church at Ephesus in Acts chapter 20. We need to be sound in speech in the things that we do and the things that we say. James chapter 1 and verse 19 tells us to be quick to hear, slow to speak. When we're not slow to speak, that's when we usually end up putting our foot in our mouth, isn't it? Stop and to think about what we're going to say. And when we stop and we think about it and realize that the things I need to be talking about is God. The things I need to be teaching is God. When I go out into the world, I need to be talking to people about God and what He means to me in my life. I need to open my mouth and I need to talk about God. What a wonderful opportunity we have had in the Beaumont area, and I know some of y'all have had the same opportunities too. I'm not the only one that lost everything that we had. There were some 450 homes in Bevel Oaks, and that's the area where we lived. And every one of those homes had over 7 feet of water in their houses. We had many of opportunity. We had some help with people coming over from area churches to help us clean out our house. And one of the ladies' groups had cooked lunch for us. But you know what? They didn't stop at cooking for us. When they got there and they gave us the food, they said, we have 200 more lunches. We're going to drive around Bevel Oaks and give them to whoever wants them. What a wonderful opportunity to tell people about God, to tell them about Jesus, to use our mouth to stand in awe of God. We stand in awe of God when we keep our vows. What kind of vows have you made to God? I know the very first vow you made to Him. You know what that was? That no longer you live, but He lives in you. I like it the way that Paul says in Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20. I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. What did Paul say? Paul said, when I became a Christian, I left my old self in the water. And I became a new person, and that new person didn't live for me, it lived for God. And that's a vow that each one of us that have obeyed the gospel made to God. Are we keeping it? Are we keeping it? Are we standing in awe of God in keeping our vows? 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 21, it is better not to have known the Lord than to have known the Lord and fallen away. You know, there's a lot of things in life that scares me. When we were allowed to go back into Bevel Oaks, it scared me when they said there's 2 things you need to be careful for. The first thing is rattlesnakes. The second thing is alligators. I opened that front door to the house, And I forgot everything that I was afraid of when I saw what was in there. But you know, I couldn't help but to think about lives of individuals who have not kept their vows to God. And as all of our furniture had been taken and piled in the corners and floated on top of each other, you know, that's the way our lives are when we don't keep our vow to God. The flood waters come in and they just pile us up. I would hate to stand before God on Judgment Day and hear the phrase, "Depart from me, Tony, I know thee not." Because I would spend a life of eternity knowing that I could have been in a better place. And that's why I want to keep my vow to God. Keep my vow to God that I made to Him, to give myself to Him and to live for Him. Thirdly, as we stand in awe of God, we go back up to verse 1. Walk prudently when you go into the house of God, and draw near to hear rather than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know that they do evil. Walk prudently. Allow God to direct our steps. That's hard to do, isn't it? It's hard to do. It's hard to give over control of our life and say, "God, you take charge and you lead." You know, God didn't promise us a rose garden when we became a Christian. He didn't say you become a Christian and life is going to be so easy. But what He did say is when you become a Christian, life is going to be hard, but in a life that has hardship like that, if you'll hold my hand, I'll take you through it. And do we allow God to direct our way? In Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 23, it's not in man to direct his steps. You know, I'm afraid if I decided to direct my own steps, my ways might not be God's ways. We see that in the world, don't we? We see a world that does not allow God to direct them walking the easy way. But we need to allow God to direct our steps, to lead us in the way that He wants us to go. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He'll do what? He'll direct your path. Oh, the directions in which we must go. You know, there's storms all through our life. Not only the storm that some of you had with Harvey coming through here, and that we had at Beaumont. There's tornadoes. There's earthquakes. Happened in Mexico. There's wildfires out in the west. There's a lot of disasters going on. But God says what? Take my hand and I'll lead you. Take my hand and I'll make straight your path. But the problem is most often we don't stand in awe of God and we take our hands out of the hands of God. And say, God, I want to do it myself. I can do it myself. Well, I'm here to tell you I'm not big enough, I'm not tall enough, I'm not strong enough to do it by myself. I substitute taught in Coons, Texas. I was off on Fridays when I was preaching there. I decided I wanted to get to know some of the little kids. I knew the kids, my kids' age, and I thought, what better way than to substitute? They called me that first morning for first grade. I said yes reluctantly. And then my wife said, that is the worst class in the whole school. I said, what's the school's number? I need a sub. I went into class that day. And after the announcements were over and the pledge and everything they did, I stood in the middle of the classroom. I said, my name is Mr. Fitzgerald. I said, I'm big, I'm tall, I'm fat, I'm ugly, and I'm mean. And so you need to do everything I say today. I had teachers coming to the window all day long to see if those kids had me tied up somewhere. But I tell you what, when we walked out of that classroom, we walked down the sidewalk, those hands were behind their backs, and they were just as good as gold for me all day long. I may be able to scare some first graders, but I don't scare the devil. He's going to be in my way. He's going to be trying to stop me. But I'm going to be standing in the awe of God, allowing God to direct my path in life. Today, you and I stand in awe of something. We either stand in awe of God or we stand in awe of the flesh. I can't tell you where you stand, and you can't tell me where I stand. We can only answer that question ourselves. Do you stand in awe of God today? Do you stand in awe? Are you speechless about God? My wife and I have suffered many things over the last month. As we cleaned out our home or our house, as we cleaned it out and took all of our possessions and lined them up on the street, we laughed a lot and we cried a lot. We left our home to move into the church building where we lived for a month. This past Wednesday, we moved into an apartment that is probably half of the size of the house that we lost in the flood. But you know what? I think that Sheila and I today have more faith than we've ever had, because we have watched God right before our face take care of us. We've received from people that we know and from people that we don't know. Sheila got a note just yesterday from a friend of one of her stepsisters. Said, I've heard about y'all's trouble. She said, I just wanted to help a little bit and send a gift card. We've heard from people that we love and cherish. We've heard from family. And we've heard from people that we don't even know. You're in our prayers. What can we do? What do you need? Well, when you need everything, what do you tell people you need? But you know, Sheila and I have said it to each other a number of times. We don't need anything because we have God. And God has blessed us and blessed us and blessed us over and over again, not only in the time of the flood after Harvey, but through the 38 years of our marriage. I know I don't look that old. We have been married 38 years. And God has been there for us. And tonight, as every day, I stand in awe of God. And the question is, how about you? Who do you stand in awe of? We always want to have an invitation when we come together, and we're going to do so at this time. If anyone needs to respond, do so as we stand and as we sing.